Hi, I'm Manny Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS legal hotline lawyer. I don't know if it's the millennial generation or ever-increasing home prices, but we're seeing more and more buyers that are forming out of groups of individuals. It could be two unmarried persons, or it could be a larger group, a collection of people who together are buying property. It's an interesting development in our industry. And in reaction to that, brokers, you need to remember one simple rule. It's not really a rule. I called it a rule because I want you to think of it that way. When you have a collection of buyers who are not married to one another, or there's more than two of them, you should advise them to seek legal counsel for assistance in preparing what I would refer to as an ownership agreement. And an ownership agreement will cover topics such as what happens to the real estate if one of the owners passes. What happens to the real estate if one of them decides they want to sell and the others don't? What happens if one person occupies the property and the others don't? Who's in charge of maintenance? Who's in charge of taxes? Who's in charge of insurance? What if there are improvements that need to be made to the property? Who's going to pay for those? Are they mandatory or discretionary improvements? So many issues that are involved in the day-to-day ownership of real estate. And when the real estate is owned by one person or one family or a married couple, then oftentimes all of those issues operate in the background because somebody simply has to handle them, and it's the owner who's going to do that. But when you've got more than one owner, these are issues that come up and they have to be resolved. And the ownership group is aided by thinking through those issues before they actually take title, resolving potential issues or problems at a time when everybody is still really happy to be involved in this collection of people. And finally, to include some sort of decision-making mechanism to assist them with answering questions that come up that maybe they didn't think about at the time they were drafting the ownership agreement, whether it's an arbitration or a mediation provision or something like that. Anyhow, a real estate lawyer should be able to help the buyers think through these issues. Every buyer is going to have their own ownership agreement. There's no way we could come up with a stock or standardized ownership agreement because the issues are going to be very unique and the solutions are going to be very unique to each set of owners. But truly, the owners will be enormously benefited long-term if they take advantage of your advice up front to hire legal counsel and think through some of these issues now as they're embarking on a huge purchase with huge long-term consequences. Better to be prepared. Whether they take your advice or not, it's important for you to give that advice. As is the situation so many times, I tell you to document your transaction folder. This is another one of those occasions where you should document your transaction file. Remember that one of your agency duties is to advise your client to seek the advice of an expert in areas that exceed the scope of your expertise. Whether this issue falls cleanly within those lines or not, no reason for us to debate on this video, but you answer the question for you and your clients if you simply give them that advice. So don't worry about whether or not they take your advice. Don't worry about whether or not they actually ever execute an ownership agreement. What's important for you is to give the advice. And anytime you advise a client to seek the advice of an expert in areas that exceed the scope of your expertise, make sure you do it in writing so you can prove later that you did that. If you have questions on this topic or any other, please send an email to me, legalhotline@warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington Realtor member.